Good. Welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody for this parallel session 5 on integrated services for clean energy transition in buildings and businesses, and the funding topic of project development assistance for stable energy investments, PDA. My name is Martin Eibel. I'm working in the LIFE Climate and Clean Energy Unit at CINEA, and I have the honor to be your moderator for this session this afternoon. This session is part of the LIFE Clean Energy Transition Info Day 2023. You might have been already in the opening plenary this morning. And throughout the day, we are going to present you our funding topics of the Call for Proposals 2023 in more detail. In this session, as I said before, we will cover the one-stop shops and the PDA. So if you think that you're in the wrong session and you would like to listen to other topics, then please, you can still switch the session by leaving this room and joining another parallel session. But if you're in the right room and you are really interested in the funding topics of one-stop shops and PDA, then you will learn more about them in a moment. But before we dive into the funding topics, first of all, I'd like to remind you that you have the possibility to ask questions via Slido. If you don't know Slido, you simply have to go to www.slido.com and enter the event code, which is #EULive23, and then select the room, which is room number 5, as you see here in the slide presented. And then you can type your question and we will get that. And since we have a tight agenda, we will only address the questions at the end of the session, so after the presentations. But by all means, please, anytime you can submit your question, please do so, and we will pick them up at the end. To avoid duplication of questions, you can also use the buttons in Slido to vote for a question. So the more votes a question gets, the higher up it is ranked, and we will address those questions which have a lot of likes at the beginning. Good. We have a full agenda of this for this session with a number of speakers, and you can see them now. You see the agenda. And you can see the speakers right now also on the screen. They have the cameras on. First, we'll have the pleasure to hear from Adrien Michel from DG Energy, from the European Commission, on how these two funding topics which we are presenting in this session are addressing the current policy context. Then my colleagues Christophe Millin and Nathalie Glicot will present you the funding topic of the one-stop shops. And my colleague Daniele Bachner will follow with the funding topic of PDA. After that, it's also great to have a project example. So we have the coordinator of the project SURE 2050 with us, which will be presented by Tina van Leerde. And then you will also get an idea of a concrete PDA project. Yeah. So I think without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Adrien Michel from DG Energy, who is going to present you the policy context on these two topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everyone. So indeed, I am about to present the policy context for the energy efficiency regulatory landscape and financial landscape as well. Starting with, next slide, please. Thank you. Starting with the origins of the Fit for 55, you know, that a few years ago, back in 2020, DG Klima established the Climate Target Plan, which paved the way towards decarbonization by 2050, with the inclusion of an intermediate target of 55% of greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030. And this is where the Fit for 55 comes from. One of the key features of the Climate Target Plan is that they have tried to evaluate the financial needs in order to achieve the targets, which were not voted yet, of course, but merely indicative. And you can see from the first graph that among the different sectors, residential is by far the one with most investment needs. And that gives a special role of energy efficiency as a whole, not only in residential, but also in industry and tertiary activities, which is really area where investments are most needed. And all in all, it is estimated somewhere between 150 to 180 billion of euros per year of additional investments. This figure is again merely indicative. It depends on the parameters that you take into account, including the energy prices. So it's just to give you an order of magnitude rather than a completely bulletproof figure, of course. As regards the built environment, which is at the core of this energy efficiency overall strategy, we have released the renovation wave communication, which is the strategy to achieve the energy efficiency targets in the residential and non-residential sectors, with established objective to at least double the renovation rate, but also increase the depth of renovation. As you know, currently it is estimated to be no more than 1% of the building stock per year to be renovated, and a very small part of it being deep renovations. But it also, within the renovation wave, interestingly, it also provides some quantified targets for the built environment on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption, which we can see in the second graph, which are reflected in the EPBD, and I will get back to the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Building Directive, later on. So all in all, this has led to the Fit for 55 package, which, to my knowledge, is probably the largest legislative package to have been put in place by the Commission, with no less than 14 legal acts to be voted. It was initiated a couple of years ago, and you probably know that this is a work in progress, but the adoption pace is, I have to say, quite impressive and being undertaken in a record time. So now let me turn to the two legal acts that are most in line with the topic of today. First of all, the Energy Efficiency Directive. Next slide, please. So among the main elements of the, well, before getting to the main elements of the Energy Efficiency Directive, let me give you a status, which, and fortunately, this is quite advanced, because we have had the validation of the text from the Council and the ITRE, which is the Industry Committee of the Parliament already, and we expect an adoption by both co-legislators for the Parliament in plenary and by the Council as well, and this is foreseen by the end of the summer. So final date, of course, to be discussed. And it includes a number of essential features. One of them, which is a new feature, because for the first time, the Energy Efficiency Directive recast introducing a binding target for energy efficiency at European level, and gives a number of avenues to make it possible. Among them, I have highlighted a few ones, which is, first of all, the application of the energy efficiency first principle for all projects. So we ensure that at least energy efficiency is considered among the options. And this is indicative but mandatory for certain projects. And I will get back to this later. The second avenue is also the strengthening of energy savings obligation in end use of energy, and this covers basically most, if not all, sectors, with the exception of the ones that are already covered by the ETS, that is the carbon market. And the third avenue is really to use the public sector and the public building stock including the building stock, as a driver for renovations and energy efficiency investments, and you will see how it is intended to be operationalized. Also, let me give you a name this relatively not new but increased focus on energy poverty and consumer empowerment. This is present in other parts of the Fit for 55, but this is really largely due to let's say the past observed evolutions of energy prices due, for example, to the war in Ukraine, and second, to expected potential energy price evolutions, and this could be also triggered by new legislative proposals from the Commission, including the creation of a new carbon market for the building and transport sectors, namely the ETS2. Next slide, please. So on the energy efficiency directive, the objective is to have a further reduction of close to 12% as compared to the original reference scenario from 2020, which establishes a reduction target by 32%, 32.5% by 2030. And we intend to have an additional effort of 12%, which will lead to approximately 36 to 39% of overall reduction. In concrete terms, that translates into having a final energy consumption at European level of no more than 763 megaton oil equivalent. As a sake of comparison, today we are a little bit higher than 900 megatons. So the effort by 2030 is quite intense. For member states, the target is not binding, but rather indicative. But there is also the creation of an ambition gap mechanism to ensure that the target is collectively achieved. Going back to the different avenues, I told you about the energy efficiency first principle, for which there are some guidance available already, and which intends to systematize the use of proven successful cost benefits analysis methods. It will be indicative, but as I said, mandatory for infrastructure project with a major impact on energy consumption, of course, for a value above 100 million euros. So every major infrastructure project will have to undertake to apply the energy efficiency principle. As regards the savings obligation, there is a kind of stepwise approach throughout time, which means that if on average the reduction of consumption is supposed to be 1.5% per year, in reality it will be only 1.3% until 2026, then 1.5% until 2028, and as of 2028 it will go up to 1.9%. So you can see relatively throughout time an increase of the effort which will be required. As regards the exemplary role of the public sector, it has an obligation to reach on average a 3% renovation rate, and which corresponds to an annual reduction of 1.9% of energy consumption. And that the clear objective here is really to accelerate the conversion of the public building stock towards the NZEB standards. This, coupled with specific rule on public procurement plus specific rule on the targets for efficient district heating, are only one of the few but calling examples of how the public sector is intended to become a driver for energy efficiency. Then I will briefly mention the financing part of. No, it's still in the previous slide. It's not on the financing part. It's on Article 28, which will provide some elements as regards the financing, which obliges the Commission to support member states to create new sources of public or private financing. So that's the supply side. And it can be made possible with the use of existing funds, such as the Social Climate Fund, but also with the creation of new national energy efficiency funds, if applicable and if deemed pertinent. Also, at the same time, there is a need to boost the demand for energy efficiency investment through regulatory measures. I have mentioned the energy efficiency first in public sector procurement rules. And finally, to shape enabling conditions to facilitate the increase that the increased demand and increased supply can match. And this can be made possible also by means of innovative financial support schemes such as on-tax or on-bill financing, but also aggregation of projects such as the implementation of national facilities, technical assistance facilities, following the model of ELENA. Next slide, please. So I will briefly go to the EPBD revision, which is less advanced than the EED. We are still under negotiations, so there is no expected date for adoption. But of course, the EPBD is extremely relevant since, as you probably know, building sector represents no less than 40% of European energy consumption and 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. And to the fact that 75% of the building stock is considered to be energy inefficient. In detail, for the EPBD, you have again a steering role for the public sector, which, for example, establishes that all new buildings under the public sector should reach at least the NZEB standard by 2027, when this requirement is only set for 2030 for the other non-building public buildings. Among the sets of proposals, tackling information bias, for example, through the obligation for energy performance certificates, which is extended and mandatory also for sales and renting of building and building units, and also with the objective to put in place some building renovation passports in the near future. It also touches upon enabling regulatory measures, for example, the objective to upgrade the 15% worst performing of the building stock at member state level, taking into account local conditions, of course, which is a kind of more dynamic approach, and also support to charging infrastructure in buildings, which allows to create synergies between the energy efficiency, the renovation of buildings with e-mobility, and also the production of on-site small renewables. Another couple of elements being, next slide, please. The national building renovation plans are to be integrated into the NECPs. So you have all the relevant documentation and information within one document, which makes it easier for the monitoring of the energy efficiency policies by the Commission. It's also, and if I still have time to mention the possibility to stop financial incentives for using fossil fuels in buildings, with the possibility for member states, if they wish so, to ban fossil fuel use in buildings. Let me finish very briefly on the financial aspect. So next slide. Okay, very briefly, we know that there's a lot of available EU resources in the current multi-annual financial framework. It is estimated between 120 and 150 billion euros for all the period, which has to be compared with the investment needs of up to almost 200 billion euros per year. So this is significant, but far from being sufficient. Also, you could add, again, this is a rough estimate of what is available in member states, and you can add another 100 billion euros to this. But you have many different avenues, but I would maybe highlight the fact that one of the best avenues to attract private capital is go as much upstream as you can and trigger the aggregation of project. And this is, we can go to next slide. This is exactly the scope of project development assistance and establishment of one-stop shops. This is made possible in different financial support programs from the EU, one of them being the LIFE CET calls that are being done on a yearly basis, and I will leave colleagues to present it further also on the application stage and the content of the yearly calls. And I will make a very final focus on ELENA, which to my knowledge, the ELENA Technical Assistance Facility has the highest leverage of all EU programs, 23 on average. That means that when you put it, you put on the table €1 from the European Union budget, you can see it up to 23 euros of other sources of investment, including from the EIB or from financial institutions or the project sponsors themselves. It's been a very, very successful instrument so far. And next slide, please. And to the point that we are now trying to put in place and to encourage member states to set up their own national ELENAs, but that's also applicable at local level. So it can be implemented either by member states or by managing authorities. And the EIB can assist the interested parties to put that in place and to tailor the ELENA facility to the needs and realities of the entity and the geographic area which is to be considered. So for further information, here is an email address which you can contact to get further information on this. And I think I slightly extended my available time, so I will stop here, but of course we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrien, for the policy context. That was very detailed and very useful. Indeed, there are also other funding instruments like ELENA, which are available to support also investments. LIFE CET is, of course, not the only funding program we offer here from the European Commission. But in terms of the policy context, if I can just sum up, what we learn here is that the targets are increasing at European level. So we need to accelerate the clean energy transition. We need to scale up the clean energy transition, be faster. You mentioned the war in Ukraine, which led to an energy crisis, which have shown us as well the dependencies and the need to really come up with alternative solutions, especially to reduce energy consumption, so energy efficiency, but also to transfer to more renewable energy sources for our supply. In addition to that, of course, bad enough as it is, the climate crisis also doesn't stop. So, I mean, that is also something to still bear in mind, albeit all the other negative headlines, but also climate change is accelerating here. So in that sense, I think it's very a good point now to turn to our colleagues to also illustrate a little bit how you can participate with your project ideas in the clean energy transition to help us to accelerate, to help us to upscale. And both of these topics we are going to present are really very spot on to do this acceleration and this upscaling. So first of all, well, before I give the floor to my colleagues, just a quick reminder on the Slido. If you have questions to Adrien, which we will take up later in the session, then please submit them via Slido. And now I give the floor over to Christoph and Nathalie to present you the integrated services for the clean energy transition in buildings and businesses. Over to you, Christoph.
Thank you, Martin. And indeed, I will do the presentation jointly with my colleague Nathalie Clicquot. I will start with presenting the general common approach of this topic on one-stop shops, and then we will define more precisely the 4 scopes that we are considering for this topic. So I just starting with a general general presentation that is common to the 4 scopes. Next slide, please. Adrien very nicely highlighted how energy efficiency and reducing our energy consumption is a very high policy priority and will be even more so in the coming years. But when it comes to concrete implementation, we are faced with the practical reality of clean energy transition, notably in the building sector, where buildings have owners, and these owners, in the end, are the one taking the decision on whether or not to invest in their property, whether or not to reduce their energy consumption. For the time being, even if the level of awareness around this necessity to reduce our consumption is probably much better than it was a few years back, there is still a lack of motivation, a lack of priority also for energy refurbishment. If it's a priority, sometimes there is a lack of skills to perform, how to do the energy renovation, how to concretely implement the different steps. And if there is skills, maybe there is no time to do this energy renovation. So in the end, we are clearly behind what should be done in order to reach our targets. On top of that, the building owners may be faced with high implementation costs due to the relatively modest size of investment or the lack of turnkey solutions on the market. And to further degrade the image, they may have limited access to adequate and attractive financing solution in order to perform this refurbishment. So the whole point of this topic on one-stop shop is presented on the next slide. The idea is to create or replicate integrated services. So the idea is to reduce the complexity for building owner or small businesses, to simplify their decision making and make it as simple as possible for building owner to invest in energy renovation. For doing so, we need to connect all the relevant actors in the value chain, making sure that they collaborate and there are synergies between the different actors and in the offer that is proposed. Streamline the access to support measures, especially where there are specific support for specific target groups. For instance, in situation where there are specific support for in situation of food poverty, for instance. What we are looking for really is for the services to be implemented, operational and tested by the end of the action. And so we will see in your proposal whether this is or not the case. If it's not clear that these services are implemented, operational and tested by the end of the action, then it's a no-go. This really need to be fully clear in your initiatives. You have many ways to propose services to their audience. It can be through online tools, through physical presence. Probably a physical presence at some points is relevant to make sure that you ensure trust and you motivate the decisions. But this is more of a gradient of excellence, let's say. In the end, the question we want to find answer to is whether or not the services or solution provided are likely to trigger action. So is the services provided enough to really motivate action and increase the intervention in clean energy transition. On the next slide, one particularity of the topic is that it can be proposed by one single applicant from one single member state. It's different from many other topics in LIFE CET. So it's possible to perform fully local initiatives with fully local partners, and also most of the activities can be conducted in local language, which is also something that can be also of interest for you. On the next slide, what we're looking for also is that this solution provide methods and support. They build expertise, organizational innovation. The idea is to create structures, services providers that are operational and gather these skills needed for clean energy transition. Some innovation in order to improve cost effectiveness, improve price transparency. In the end, also a work to be performed to make sure that you create trust of homeowners towards the services that are provided, so they also are more likely to trigger to engage in clean energy transition. And this trust could be ensured through, for instance, clear liabilities, quality assurance schemes, dedicated consumer protection policies, and so on. So the idea is really to build something that is strong enough and trustworthy enough so that in the end, the final beneficiaries will engage in clean energy transition. When I mentioned strong and trustworthy partnership, on the next slide, you can see more or less what I mean. You need to have to propose a solution that is an answer to the needs of the targeted stakeholders, and you can and you have to demonstrate somehow that you do answer a need from targeted stakeholders, and you also gather some kind of support from the key stakeholders that will be important for your operation to succeed. So if you need some specific type of stakeholders to be involved then in the action, demonstrating the support from these stakeholders at even at proposal stage through partnership or through letters of support is important. And then during the action also, we want to see the actions that you conduct in order to mobilize those stakeholders to make sure that the important stakeholders are involved in your initiatives. And also in the governance and general advice around your initiative. On the next slide, I just want to clarify one point we mentioned in the topic on self-sustained business model. It's more of a mindset we want to look for. We're looking for. It's likely that your initiatives will not be totally equilibrated by the end of the action. It's a complicated path, and maybe there is still need for subsidies by the end of your action. But we want to see some kind of movement toward self-sustainability by looking for further sources of funding after the project end, or by looking for a possible business model after the project completion. What we want to be sure of is that when the project ends, the structures that were put in place are still operating somehow. So this is what we want to look for. We don't want a one-off where we've support the initiative for a number of years, and then when the project is over, then the initiative is over. That's what we really want to avoid. On the next slide, on communication, we want you to succeed. So we want your operation to be a success and provide answers to your local stakeholders. We also want you to communicate your results to others, so to share your experience and explain to other possible project promoters how you did, and how they could also replicate your idea. So this is particularly important. This is particularly important in the frame of Scope A, targeting homeowners, where we do have a specific initiative in order to for the different projects to communicate between each other. On the next slide, I'm presenting also a question on whether or not you should include financing services in your initiative. You should, in any case, facilitate the access to adequate financing offers, but you do not necessarily have to develop your own financing offer. So you could also consider partnerships with retail banks, for instance, or financial operators. You could also consider actions to facilitate access to public grant or even to pre-finance those public grants. So to consider the facilitation of financing the investment, but not necessarily, or it's not a requirement, let's say, to bring ad hoc, specifically tailored financing offer. And on the next slide, whether or not investment should be reached by the end of the action. Yes, a pilot phase is needed. So we expect your services to be fully implemented, operational, and tested by the end of the action. And tested means some investment triggered. But at the difference of PDAs that we will see afterwards, there is no minimum volume prescribed for the investment pipeline. What we want to see is some kind of balance between the complexity of your approach and the comprehensiveness of your solutions. If it's very complex, then or very nicely tailored and comprehensive set of solutions that you put in place, then we can understand that the investment triggered during the action may be rather limited. If you go for a very simple solution, then the short-term impact should also be very high. So it's kind of a balance we want to see. And on the next slide, the impacts that we want to see, just as a reminder, and I think it's also valid for the rest of topics, always refer to the topic-specific indicators that we are providing. So it's in the topic description. You don't necessarily have to address all of the listed impact indicators. That depends on the logic of intervention. And especially in our case, we have 4 different scopes. So it will also depend on the scopes that you're choosing. You may propose also additional indicators for your activity. And in the end, what we also want to see is the impact you have on the common indicators for the LIFE CET program, meaning in our case, investment in energy efficiency and energy savings. So this is also what we want to see. And I pass the floor on the next slide to Natalie, presenting one of the first of the 4 distinct scopes.
Yes, thank you, Christophe, for taking us through the common objectives of these integrated services for buildings and businesses. As you mentioned, we have 4 different scopes for under this topic. And why is that? It's because we believe we are addressing very different market segments: private non-professional homeowners, private professional housing operators, local public building owners, or small and medium businesses. These are very different market segments requiring having different needs and having different solutions probably for the organization of the integrated services. What we want you to do in your project is really to start from the perspective and the experience of your prospective beneficiaries, who would be the target group of your integrated services, and to see how you can really support them throughout the whole customer journey. So in terms of scope, we would ask you to focus on one of these 4 scopes. In case you want to address several scopes, this will need to be fully justified, but this is not expected. Next slide. So I will present the first one. The first one address private non-professional homeowners. That is the general public, you and me, trying to renovate your home and trying to find your way through the maze of home renovation. Maybe the picture here below rings a bell. Basically, this is a topic that was already open in previous years under the name Home Reno, and we're expecting one-stop shop that will really support and cover the whole customer journey. And we really expect to go a step further now, because it's a continuation of an existing topic. We really want to take to raise the level of of expectation to support the most problematic phases for the homeowners for home renovation. So we would not expect services that only focus on the first level of providing information to homeowners or simplified diagnosis, for instance, but really we expect you to go a step further and be actively supporting the structuring and provision of financing, the liaising with the professional constructors, etc. And also a very important phase is the monitoring of the delivery, the monitoring of the works and providing some quality assurance. Next slide.
So I will present the next slide. It's a new focus actually. So on top of the one targeting non-professional homeowners, we have a new focus on private professional housing operators. So it's with a core focus on rental housing. Here we target, for instance, housing companies, housing cooperative, real estate investors, property managers, building administrators, and so on. So the type of public is different, and so also the type of solutions to be developed is probably different too. You don't address the same way an individual homeowner than you address a large housing company, and the needs and trigger for action may be different also. So you need to adapt your solution to this particular public. For instance, in a real estate portfolio management and asset valuation perspective. So maybe the motivation to engage in energy refurbishment in that case would be different, and the way to talk to and propose solution to this public is also different. The services should not be limited to first level information and generic diagnosis, which is the case for all of the scopes actually in our topic. And the idea is to go beyond that and also address more problematic stages. For this particular public, you could consider also the development of strategic partnerships, for instance, with construction companies or with financial institutions, notably in the context of the EU taxonomy. You could consider the development of dedicated financial or fiscal schemes, or the development of a sustainable business model. You should pay particular attention in this scope also on governance issue and facilitate decisions and conflict resolutions among co-owners. So in the case where you have multiple owners of the assets, then how do you manage these decisions and the governance of it? And I pass to the next slide for the next scope.
Yes, so the scope C is about local public buildings owner. So here the focus is on existing public buildings, administrative buildings, hospitals, schools. Here we expect the integrated services to cover a large territory, but also to be at the service of small and medium-sized public bodies. So this is a continuation basically of a previous funding topic which was called RenoPub. Under this topic, we would really expect project to establish and operate facilitation structures which can support these public bodies with technical, financial, or legal advice, help also with the procurement procedures, and similarly to the previous scope, so it provides some quality assurance for the work. Some interesting features under this scope is the need to look into making the best possible use of public money and blending public and private funding, facilitating the uptake of EU funding sources for renovation in public buildings is also crucial. We would like also you as project developers to pay attention to the governance mechanism and how to make sure we are setting up a governance structure that can be useful for the long term, a governance structure that allows you to make further refurbishment programs in the future, increase skills for local authorities, but also look at the long-term sustainability, for instance, with a business model. Next slide.
And the last but not least scope, which is also a new scope, is on small and medium businesses. So not only targeting building refurbishment, but it can be also on the energy processes. The idea here again is that even if you're targeting professional stakeholders, they may not have the skills on energy matters and or the time to develop a comprehensive intervention on energy processes and energy refurbishment. So the idea here again is to provide services that go beyond simple delivery of audits and information, but really accompany the small and medium businesses in the whole process for preparation and implementation of the investment. So here again, we want to see by the end of it, concrete action and investment trigger. The idea could be to develop a business case, engineering, procurement, supervision of work, and so on, but really accompany the small and medium-sized enterprises throughout the full process. And here, because you work also at like let's say macro level of or may address several different entities, you could envisage operational support to groups of company doing project aggregation, joint procurement activities, and so on, in a perspective of territorial development. So that could be also an option considered for this scope D. And then I leave the last slides for Natalie to very briefly present where you can find example actually.
Yes, we will go very quickly in the interest of time. This is to let you know not to start from scratch, especially if you're addressing some of the scopes that were covered by previous funding topics. So there are a lot of examples of existing one-stop shop, especially the ones on integrated home renovation services. Well, with our program, we've been supporting now around 36 projects all across Europe, and you can find here a couple of names that may be of interest for you, and we invite you to have a deeper look. Next slide. And then just to give you an example of a successful project, the Shirinov project in Bulgaria, which set up one-stop shops for residential building renovation, targeting specifically a multifamily building in Sofia. So this was a successful project trying to transition from an entirely publicly financed model, moving towards a more market-based financing model. And the project looked into 8 districts of Sofia to prepare a pilot pipeline of multifamily buildings for renovation. And another interesting features is the more long-term impact of the project, as the model was included in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan of Bulgaria. Thank you very much. I think we will end here in the interest of time, and we will answer your questions afterwards. Don't hesitate to use Slido.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I want to say, Natalie, but that's very good that we reinforce the messages mutually. Thanks very much, Christoph and Natalie, for this presentation of the topic. As you saw, there's a lot of detail in it. I think one of the 2 things to remember for sure is, choose one of the scopes out of the 4. You don't have to address all the 4. It's not expected. Just choose one that makes probably most sense. And also that you can apply as a single country, basically. I think that's also important to say. So you can, in principle, apply with one eligible entity to this topic. And again, also in the relevance to the policy context, as Hadrien also mentioned, I mean, one-stop shops, that is definitely an instrument which is perceived to be necessary and also fundamental to accelerate the market for renovation of buildings, be it a residential sector or in the public sector. So that is this topic is really fully supportive of the revised and strengthened energy efficiency directive, for example, but also the upcoming energy performance of buildings directive of the targets in there. And without further ado, just a reminder again about use the hashtag #EULIFE23. Choose room number 5 if you have questions to our speakers, and we will address the questions later on. So now I pass on the floor to my colleague Daniela Bachner, who is going to explain to you the project development assistance topic. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon to all our listeners. So as Martin already introduced, I'm going to explain to you the core topic of project development assistance, which is in fact one of our long-lasting core topics. So it has already been in place in a similar type of format since 2011, and we have been able to support 64 projects up to now with this project development assistance topic, which have all produced very, very innovative and interesting as well as replicable approaches. If you go to the next slide, please. So project development assistance is essentially there in order to support you as an applicant to launch your already predefined investment project. So if you already have an idea of a set of investment projects and an investment pipeline, and you want to further develop these investments into a set which can be launched and invested into, then you're right under the project development assistance. So essentially, PDA supports everything from the business plan up to a procurement procedure and then to the actual launch of the investment. All the brain work which goes into these individual steps of business plan, feasibility study, energy audit, technical specifications, procurement procedures are eligible to be supported with the project development assistance funds. The focus of these investments should be in ambitious, sustainable energy, meaning energy efficiency, so renovation of assets as well as renewable energies, but we will come to that in a bit. If you please move forward to the objectives on the next slide. So with this topic, we support building expertise within the project developers in order to launch and to launch investments and mobilize with that private finance. As Adrien had mentioned before, it's absolutely crucial to have a large leverage on in terms of private finance on the public funding, as the public funding alone is by far not sufficient in order to reach our climate targets, and thus it's crucial to have a high leverage of private financing. It's also there to remove legal, administrative, and other market barriers which may still be in place. So in the project development procedure, a crucial aspect is to really tackle these barriers and reduce them or remove them. We focus on projects that have an innovative aspect to it. So it could be in terms of the organizational innovation, how you set up the development process behind it, or in terms of the financial engineering. So for example, aggregating these typically rather small scale investments to a larger package, which is then more interesting for financial institutions to finance it. And thus, by this aggregating, you would also minimize the transaction costs for the individual investment projects. We look for proposals and then projects which have a high degree of replicability. So we have seen in previous years that we had some very good and innovative approaches which were then taken up by other countries, by other actors, and have been further developed and applied in their specific context. So that's also one of the key aspects we are looking into. Next slide, please. So in terms of project promoters, the project promoters, so the applicants to the PDA call to topic, could either be public organizations or private organizations. So public authorities, public infrastructure operators, or also private infrastructure operators, then energy agencies, energy service companies, so ESCOs typically, or for example, large-scale property owners, retail chains, or also businesses, services, and industry. So all of these different promoters are eligible under the project development assistance. In terms of the specific scope, please go on to the next slide. So we look for projects that deliver replicable solutions, as I have mentioned before, in order to accelerate sustainable energy investments. And the focus is on either organizational innovation or financial engineering, or can also be both, and on the removal of the existing barriers. When we dig a bit further in the details, please go to the next slide. What we understand as organizational innovation to mobilize the investment program. This could be, for example, setting up a dedicated project development unit within the organization that applies to the PDA, or, for example, establishing a more efficient procurement procedure in order to bundle and pool assets to a larger scale portfolio. And on the next slide, so this can be either organizational innovation or financial engineering, or if you consider both important, it can also be the proposals can also cover both of these aspects. The financial engineering. And as I had mentioned before, and Hadrien had also mentioned, the focus is clearly on leveraging enhanced levels of private investment in order to make best use of public money. And the focus could also lie on improving combination of existing funds. So, for example, blending different types of funds. Some examples here under the financial engineering, which you might be aware of, are the energy performance contracting, then setting up dedicated financial instruments, blended funds, as I have mentioned before, or could also be innovative on-bill or on-tax payment schemes, as well as community-based financing schemes. In terms of removing the barriers and the high level of ambition, please move on to the next slide. Here we would like to highlight the focus on investments into really highly ambitious levels of energy savings and renewable energy generation. So the PDA topic is clearly focused on the ambitious projects, which really try to implement something which far goes beyond the typical state-of-the-art project. So that could be deep renovation, could be achieving near zero energy building standards, could be positive energy buildings, or highly energy efficient infrastructure measures, or a very high level of renewable energy generation in a specific context. In terms of the geographical focus, it could either be district, city, or a wider level. If you move on to the next slide, please. The target sectors, we have them specified in more detail this year. So as in previous years, clearly we have buildings, so existing residential buildings, existing non-residential buildings, but we also opened up a bit more in terms of specifying the different target sectors we are looking out for, which cover also district heating, so renovation measures in existing district heating systems, plus the extension of the existing district heating networks. Then infrastructure could be water, wastewater, public lighting, and so on and so forth. Then we would also cover businesses, including industry, services, SMEs, clearly. Any investments into renewables, which are either connected to building integrated small-scale renewable application, or some kind of citizen-driven renewable energy project. And then also investments into urban mobility and low-emission urban mobility. If you move on now to the next slide, please. Some facts and figures. So the hint which Hadrien had in his presentation regarding the leverage factor. So we require a leverage factor, meaning that for one euro of grant funding, we are looking for at least 15 euro of investments launched. And these have to be launched before the end of the project, and you have to provide an evidence to that. One of the specifics of PDA is also that proposals presented by a single country consortium or even a single beneficiary are actually eligible. So we also accept that under PDA because it's a very specific focus. Okay, and now we would move on to the next slide. I will skip this one because Christophe had presented it before. The four main things for a successful PDA are the adequate starting point, know where you are starting from, the clear concept from the beginning to the very end, which is the launch of the investment, the solid impact. Please describe us what is the status quo, what would be the business as usual case, and how do you provide additional impact, and the proven engagement. So bring the asset owners you are targeting on board in the consortium. And we have a number of very interesting project examples, as I had mentioned, and I'm happy to have one here today, which will be presented to you in a bit. And with that, I would like to thank you and hand back to Martin.
Thanks very much, Daniela, for the presentation on the project development assistance. And as you mentioned, there is a project coordinator who's currently running a PDA project, or basically, I think it's almost coming to an end. So you will hear from a successful example. Again, reminder, hashtag EU Live 23, room number 5. If you want to ask questions via Slido, you see here again the hashtag. Go to slido.com, hashtag EU Live 23, choose room parallel 5 / OSS -PDA, and then you can ask the questions. We will come to these questions in a second, but before we do that, Tina, please tell us about the SURE 2050 project.
Thanks a lot. You can move directly on to the next slide. SURE 2050 stands for Sustainable Public Real Estate by 2050. Where did we start from? Actually, we start from a barrier that was encountered in another European project, FALCO, Financing Local Climate Plans, where we saw that financing is one of the major barriers, but the financing that we have available, we need to invest it in the right buildings at the right time. And often public building owners, they have a large portfolio, for example, in municipality cities. They don't always know how to start to bring all their buildings to the goals of 2050. So that's where the idea or the concept came from for SURE 2050. So we first start with developing a real estate strategy. And from that real estate strategy will come the investments towards the carbon-free building. So you have to see a real estate strategy. It's actually like a pipeline of investment projects. And in a real estate strategy, you're going to think at a strategic level, which buildings do we need, which ones do we have, and how can we combine them and come to a future-proof portfolio, which we will make then a future-proof towards 2050, so carbon-free. We focused on small, medium-sized, also some large cities and municipalities in Flanders. It's a region in Belgium. And we also had the public organizations at the Flemish regional level as participants in the projects. You can move on to the next slide. What made the project successful from if we started with the preparation, timing, of course, you need to foresee sufficient time, especially to gather all the stakeholders, also to talk to the participants and get them involved. So start on time. But in this case also, and Daniela also mentioned it before, the idea and the concept need to be very clear. And that was the case when we started the preparation. Because it's clear, it's simple, and it was a barrier at the moment. So that created the interest with both the consortium partners, but also with the participants. The consortium that we put together, and we started with one party, a factor 4, which was also partner in the Falco project, where the ID came from. But then we also gathered the other partners for the proposal to ensure that we had enough support and connection to the participants that we wanted to target. Okay, you can move on to the next slide. Then during the execution of the project, of course, you have the coordination, which is very important. So regular updates, alignment, because we had to align our approach or mitigate during the project. So these short lines are very important. Also very important that the consortium partners know which role they have and what the added value is in the project. And the follow-up at the end of the project, you want to have the impact even after the end of the project. We did that with a framework contract, which is now available and will support municipalities and actually all public building owners to create this real estate strategy. And this real estate, the results of this real estate strategy are becoming from these strategies. If we can combine them, we actually also come to this aggregation of investments in energy efficiency. So that's an extra impact that we generate. And there as well, it's not on the slide, but I also want to mention it, that we always kept a very short line to other stakeholders in specifically a policy level. So with SURE 2050, we also ensured that the idea of a real estate strategy is incorporated into policy. And we succeeded in that. It's actually now an obligation at the Flemish level for public entities to have a real estate strategy. And for municipalities, it's not an obligation, but it's taken as a best practice in the local energy and climate pacts. Some lessons learned. So the application was free. So for the participants, they did not have to pay anything, which was very beneficial, especially for smaller municipalities, because often they fall outside of all these European projects. So that was beneficial, but on the other hand, a low threshold, but also less commitment. So it was not always easy during the project to get everyone motivated. Especially because lack of resources, lack of financial resources, but human resources as well with municipalities. We had some risk mitigations, and so important to also think up front of what could happen and during the project to have these short lines so you can steer and mitigate during the project as well. And one last point is we had a leverage factor for the project as well. So we received 1.2 million euro with a leverage factor of 1 to 20. So we had to needed to come to 20 million euro of investments, and it took some time, or it takes some time, especially in the public sector, to launch investment projects. So take that into account as well to ensure that you can reach your leverage factor and the investments. Yeah, our last slide is just an overview of our consortium for the project. So we can skip that one.
Tina, maybe you just want to say from which organization you are? I think you didn't mention it at the beginning.
Sorry, I'm from the Flemish Energy Company. So we are facilitating the public sector in Flanders on energy and energy efficiency projects.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tina, and thank you very much for this insight into the SURE 2050 project. Can I ask all the speakers to switch on the cameras again? Because now we would like to move on to the question and answer session. So if you have now still a question, you see here again the hashtag EULIFE23 on slido.com, where you can pose a question. But in the meantime, we already start with the questions here. I read them out. so that everybody hears them. If we already are working on a one-stop shop approach for several years now, can we apply to improve it, or do we need to start from a whole new idea? Maybe Christoph or Natalie, if you can take this one.
Yes, I can take this one. In the slide, we mentioned the idea of creating or developing existing one-stop shop. So you can clearly start from an existing one-stop shop and developing the services. What you need to do in that case is to very clearly explain where you are coming from, where you are in developing your one-stop shop. What is it? What is it currently doing? And explain also very clearly what the project would add to what is already existing. We say create, develop. We also say replicate. So I can mention you could very well also copy an idea that exists elsewhere and simply adapt it to your local context. So it doesn't need to be fully innovative. You can just take a good idea elsewhere and try in your local environment. In the end, what is difficult for this one-stop shop topic is not to describe what you pretend to do or what you plan to do. What is very difficult is to concretely put it in place and do it. So the description is easy. The actual delivery is much more complicated. You need to involve the stakeholders, which takes time. You need to motivate them, which takes time. You need to deal with the delays that exist, for instance, in the public sector, as mentioned for the SURE 2050 project. You need to deal with the delays that exist in the condominium sector. So this is where the difficulty lies, not so much in the description of activities.
Thanks very much, Christoph. Let's move on to the next question. Can private finance be our own financing? I would have thought yes, of course, if you do crowdfunding or something like that, or own capital for sure. But Christoph, and maybe also Daniela, if you want to add something here, please.
Yes, I will take this one. Thank you, Martin. So indeed, the private financing can come from the respective organization that is applying for the call topic. The only thing which is excluding or which would cause an exclusion is if the same assets, so the renovation of the same assets, the specific measures you're proposing are already funded elsewhere as well. So that would be an exclusion factor, but in respect where the financing is coming from, if it's the organization's own financing or crowdfunding, as Martin had mentioned, that is not important.
Christoph, do you want to add something for the one-stop shops, or is that covering?
I think it's covering, and I can do it together with the next one if.
Yes, if you want to read it out.
So since the pilot phase has to be reached, can the investment cost for energy efficiency renovation be covered? So in that case, it's a clear no. What we're covering with a LIFE CET subsidy is, or LIFE CET grant is a cost for developing, implementing, and testing the services, but not for the investment itself. The services should trigger investment. For the investment itself, you need to find resources. This could be actually private sources, and more particularly in the case, for instance, of homeowners, the private sources of excellence would be the actual resources of the homeowners themselves. So to motivate them to allocate their resources to energy refurbishment of their home rather than something else.
Okay, thanks very much, Christoph. Then we move on to the next question, which is also relating to the one-stop shops, I guess. If our one-stop shop is set up as a local public service, how do we establish it's operating without public financing subsidies at the end? Do we have some experience there, Natalie and Christoph?
So again, I can take this one. Well, it depends on the approach indeed. What you have to look for is a continuation of the services once the grant from the LIFE CET program is over. So we want to be fully sure that once the grant is over, the services are still in place and still providing solutions to their target audience. So this needs to be fully clear. That can be done by looking for further sources of subsidies after the project end. But if you are targeting private actors such as homeowners, such as housing companies, you may also consider at some point that even for public services, the services are paid by the beneficiaries to some extent because they are indeed active support, and this exists in a number of cases of public services too. So this kind of things could also be considered. What
Thanks
we
very
want
much.
to see clearly is that it still exists at the end of the project. That should be crystal clear. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Christoph. We can probably take the next couple of questions, and these will be the last ones by Daniela, because it touches both questions touch on the PDA topic. One is on whether new construction projects are also eligible under the PDA topic, and the second question is about how much budget there is in the indicative budget for PDA this year.
So in terms of the first question, the answer is in principle no. So for buildings, for infrastructure, we clearly focus on decarbonization of existing assets. However, when it comes to renewable energies in a given context, then clearly it's covering new investments into new assets. But for buildings, for infrastructure, we only focus on existing assets. For the second question, so the overall budget available to PDA is 7 million euros this year. And on one of the slides, I had the indicative budget, which is between 500,000 and 1.5 million euros per project, which is also what Tina mentioned before for the SURE 2050. So that's the range or typically asked for in PDA projects, which would mean on average probably 6 projects would be funded under this call.
Maybe we can add here as well. Sorry, Christoph, if I could just come in. For the PDA topic, Daniela, I think it's also true to say that in the last years, we also had rather high success rates for this topic. So 5, 6 sounds probably not like a lot, but compared to the whole number of applications we received, it's not a bad success rate, I guess.
We would be in a range of 35–40% success rate from previous years' experience. So that doesn't mean that's the same ratio this year, but that has been the ratio in the past years. And I think Christoph wanted to add something to it.
Yes, just because you mentioned the budget for PDA, I can complete with the budget for one-stop shop, which is 15 million. So more or less an average size also of 1.5 million per project. That means around 10 projects for the 4 different groups together.
Super, thanks, Christoph, for complimenting. Okay, I think we'll have to close here. We are running already a little bit late. Just before closing, let me just remind you that the recordings of the session, as well as the presentation slides, will be all made available on the SINEA website, but also on the funding and tender portal. So if you go to the topic to your topic, the OSS topic or the PDA topic on the funding and tender portal, you will find under call documents a link to the info session recordings and presentations, which will lead you to the recordings here and the presentation slides. I'm not entirely sure when this will be all up and running on the website, but it should be in the next days, basically. Maybe you check next week, then I think you are more on the safe side. I also like to remind you that since we are on the B2Match platform, you also have the possibility to meet bilaterally with other organizations, with other stakeholders, if you want to team up for project proposals or exchange anything on ideas. then please make use of this B2Match platform, which will be available until November, if I understand rightly. So you have plenty of time, and I think there are several thousand participants registered. So it's a very good source for networking and also exchanging on project ideas and finding the right partners. And finally, I would like to thank very much all the speakers of the session today, my colleagues, but also Adrian Michel from DG Energy, and also Tina from the Flemish Energy Agency, for taking the time to join us and present all the information. And of course, also a big thank you to you, the listeners, the participants to this session, to join us, to listen to us, for your interest. And we all wish you, of course, a very good luck with your proposal writing. If you have any further questions afterwards, after we close the session, we also have the functional mailbox where you can reach us if you need any clarifications on the topic descriptions. And I'm not sure if you have a slide on this, but you will find it also on the CINEA website. It would be CINEA-live-cet at ec.europa.eu. So it's very straightforward in principle. So there you can send us any questions on the clarifications on the call text. I mean, please do not send us any emails regarding who can I contact if I want a project partner or something like that. We can't really help you. We can't bring you together, but we can definitely help you to clarify any misunderstandings in the text, or if you need any clarifications on the call text, then we are very happy to help you there. Also, as was mentioned this morning, there are FAQs published regularly on the Funding and Tenders portal. So also check back frequently to look for these FAQs, because they can also help you to clarify any doubts and also improve your proposal. And finally, also to draw your attention to the national contact points, which are there in every country. We have dedicated people who you can contact in your own language, who can help you with your proposal and explain you a little bit the LIFE program. If you want to find your national contact point, you have to go to the LIFE page on CINEA. And there we have got a dedicated page which is called LIFE in European countries. And there you find a list A to Z for all the national contact points in Europe. And with that, I would like to thank you all, and I wish you a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.